there's something that's always bothered me about the Apology. And it's the following. Socrates is accused of impiety and corrupting the young. We'll leave the corruption of the young defense alone. But the impiety charge is weird because in some ways the best way to think about what impiety is, at least in that context, is a certain kind of revisionary programs with the gods of the state or the gods of the people. And what Melodist seems to be more interested in making stick against Socrates is a particularly egregious kind of revisionism, which is atheism. And so you might say the case against Socrates isn't very well made by Melodist. And in fact, it looks like it could be very easily made better by, in fact, things that are just available. So again, it looks like Socrates is not an atheist. It looks like he believes in the divine voice in his ear, and it looks like even with his revisionary programs of the gods, it doesn't look like he's an atheist. So the atheism charge still stinks, but that doesn't mean that the sort of the more broad charge of impiety couldn't be made, and in fact seems like it's quite easily made, which is that Socrates, again, is talking about weird things that talk in his ear. It looks like he doesn't think that the stories of Zeus and the other Olympians are correct. It looks like he's pretty clear about saying that at the opening stages of the Euthyphro dialogue. Socrates doesn't look like he's kind of down with a good deal of the way that the gods are being portrayed. And even though it looks like he invokes them, he seems to invoke Apollo. It looks like he's following the Delphic Oracle. But even in the sort of the lead up to the Delphic Oracle, he disagrees with the Oracle. He says that whenever the Oracle says that no one's wiser than Socrates, he's like, that's some fucking bullshit. I'm going to go and find somebody wiser than me and take it up to the Oracle and say, take a look at this guy, motherfucker. This guy's so much wiser than me, so you're refuted. What an incredibly impious thing to think that you know better than the Oracle, as opposed to say, well, the Oracle says that I'm the wisest. How in the world could that be true? It doesn't seem right to me, but now I got to figure out what that means. He doesn't say that. He's an incredibly immodest about all of this, and it looks like he's ready to go up and refute the Oracle. So even though he says in the end he's following the Oracle, it looks like at the beginning he's out to refute the Oracle. So what's the deal? And the first thought is that it looks like Socrates might be guilty of the impiety charge. And it looks like the only reason why he's able to respond to it is because of the fact that he just gets to knock the head of some dingbat named Melodist. I mean, the guy just blows it. So in some ways, and this is sort of a general problem with Socratic dialogues generally, is that Socrates, for the most part, just talks to morons. And how exactly is Socrates supposed to be really that successful whenever you just talk to morons? Wouldn't it be better if Socrates talked to somebody who was really smart? There are plenty of other Platonic dialogues that you see that, but I mean, like with some of the early dialogues, he just seems to talk to doofuses. The Ion is not impressive. Meno thinks he's impressive, but he's not. Euthyphro's not a particularly impressive guy. Crito's no good at thinking. It takes a while for us to get to dialogues where Socrates talks to somebody really worth talking to. And so there's something disappointing about that, I have to admit. Socrates is an impressive individual, but whatever intellectual victories he scores, especially in the early methodological dialogues, don't strike me as particularly impressive victories. They may be lessons, and that may be part of the feature of it, which is to think of them more as kind of lessons of method and less lessons of sort of some deep philosophical consequence. But nevertheless, there are a handful of other things to think about with the impiety charge, which is that it doesn't seem to me that the Athenians really care that much about the sort of revisions to the gods. It looks like the impiety charge would be very, very difficult for the Athenians to be like, I'm all mad about these revisions. First off, just you might say the sort of the Greek the Greek Olympian stories had lots of easy little revisions that are sort of local taste and putting some local stank on a story, and maybe some new god kind of gets more interesting, or some new story shows up and it's different from how you saw before. That's perfectly consistent with the way that the Olympian stories seem to get told. The second thing is that it looks like they had a very high tolerance for people saying weird shit about the gods to them all the time. And his name was Euthyphro. It looks like they laughed at him. It looked like nobody was like, Euthyphro's guilty of piety, despite the fact that he tells us weird stories about the gods. So even there, it looks like the Athenians have got a sort of a really high tolerance for this. Moreover, it does look like the Athenians themselves make significant revisions to the gods and have a very high tolerance, which is that, as we see at the beginning of the Republic, Socrates is coming back from a festival, the festival of Bendis. Now, there's a reason why whenever you get told stories of the Greek gods that you don't get a story of Bendis, is because Bendis is not a Greek god. Bendis is a Thracian god of the moon and the underworld, and it looks like it's because these Greeks have been doing business with Thracians. Why? Well, again, there are political reasons why, which is the fact that the Athenians are at war with the Spartans and they don't like going outside of their walls to farm their farms, and so as a consequence need to be able to trade with people to get their grain. They have to go all the way up to the Black Sea to get it because the Spartans aren't going to march that far up to go get them, so they bring the grain down. They've got a bunch of these folks from up in the Black Sea living there, and so as a consequence they want to practice their religion, and the Athenians are like, sure, we'll throw a big party for you. Invite all the Athenians to come down to the festival of Bendis. The Athenians seem to have quite a high tolerance for religious revision and new gods and new ways of thinking about the gods. So even if Socrates is guilty of a kind of impiety, it doesn't look like the Athenians really should have had such a big response to that, because it looks like they had a tolerance for it all over the place. So it looks very difficult. It looks very hard to be able to say, like, even if they thought that he was guilty of impiety, it's hard to see them saying something like, look, this is something that deserves the death penalty. Now, again, it looks like Socrates had baited them into doing that. More on the poke the bear problem in the Apology at another time. But it's just weird that they would think, and especially given the votes, which is that it looks like more people voted for the death penalty than voted that he was guilty. So there are people who thought that he was innocent of corrupting the young and impiety, but nevertheless voted for death. That seems very, very strange to me. So the Apology bothers me. The Apology bothers me a lot. There are parts of it that make me think, what moron is part of the prosecution? Who does that? There are the features of the Apology that seem very strange to me. Now, again, the best hypothesis is that why is Socrates getting such vicious treatment here? It really has to do with the fact that this is more about people playing and sort of overplaying their hand in political vendettas. That seems like the best explanation, because it doesn't look like anybody really established anything particularly well. Socrates' defense doesn't really defend himself against the impiety charge. It looks like the defense against the corrupting the young charge doesn't look like it's actually a defense against corrupting the young. It's just the defense that he didn't mean to do it if he did it. I just find the Apology very, very disappointing. Just where I'm at.